Nasr al Hariri is the president of the National Coalition of Syrian Revolution and Opposition Forces. He joins us now from Istanbul. Nasr, good to have you here on the NewsHour. You know, coming into this pandemic, when we saw the majority of some of the world's most wealthiest countries' healthcare systems being brought to their knees because of this pandemic, there was a real concern, a potential nightmare scenario being sort of thrown out there in terms of, you know, what happens when this pandemic gains a foothold in poorer countries, in countries that have been torn apart by war. Syria, your country, one of those countries that fits the description. What's the situation like there?
Hello, it's very nice to be with you. Today, the situation is very difficult as we have been in a state of war for more than 10 years. And as you know, the Assad regime and Russia have directly targeted hospitals and medical centers and healthcare units. These are war crimes and crimes against humanity. Syria has lost thousands of its medical personnel. Its medical infrastructures have been also destroyed, and it is now facing the virus without any resources or infrastructures, which means that we are facing a serious disaster. And in addition to that, chaos, corruption, and economic collapse in regime areas have caused similar results, and the number of deaths and injuries are large, but we don't have accurate figures due to the regime's policies in that region.
Many countries around the world, as we speak, are experiencing a spike in cases, a rising trend in deaths and hospitalizations. The situation in Syria, it should not be any different. I mean, if the virus if the trend continues in terms of the virus spreading, especially in the northwestern region or province of Idlib, do you think that this is perhaps a growing concern that the Assad regime and its partners like Russia could use this as leverage against the international community, mostly Turkey?
Sure, as you know, Russia and the regime are using every possible means to pressure the Syrian people and their allies. From this regard, we warn of dangerous scenarios from this aspect. Winter hits Syria, and the epidemic escalating Syrian lives are of no value to the Assad regime. And there is a lot of evidence about diverting international aid to prevent it from reaching the Syrian people, even in regime-controlled areas. The regime links aid to institutions affiliated with its security apparatus, and thus turns into a means of financing those agencies and their crimes against Syria and Syrians. All parties lose as long as this regime is in place and in control and in power. The risks to Europe and Turkey from Assad remaining in power will exceed the risks of the epidemic itself.
Okay. Finally, I want to ask you, so when you look at the situation, you talked about Syria's internal conflict being a decade old, but since March, we've seen fairly little change in the situation in Syria. Do you think that's primarily because of the coronavirus pandemic?
No, the cause behind that is Al-Assad regime itself. As you know, the Assad regime, Russia and Iran are continuing to bombard, destroy, and displace liberated areas. Their military campaign and operations are continuous, especially in northwest of Syria, despite the agreement between Russia and Turkey in the beginning of this year about the escalation zone in the area, because the Syrian regime and its allies are still counting on the military strategy as the only way to get complete victory against the Syrian people. So in addition to the danger of the Syrian regime itself, we are facing, in addition to that, we are facing coronavirus and the financial deteriorating in this area, in addition to the winter and its difficulties.
Nasr al Hariri, thank you for your time. I do appreciate your analysis here on the NewsHour.